If I said to you here at the Watercress Line we have a V-class locomotive and a bully like Pacific, you may not be able to tell exactly which engines I'm talking about. However, if I said Battle of Britain Manston and Schools Class Cheltenham, suddenly you may have a better idea. Naming locomotives isn't necessary. There's nothing unique about them, that's what their number's for, that's the unique differentiator between the classes. However, it's an excellent PR and marketing trick. Ever since the early days of the railways, where they were encouraging people to embrace this new technology, to the modern days where rail companies compete with each other to attract new passengers, PR has always played a big part. So what does naming of locomotives and trains have to do with all of this? The year is 1925. Southern Railway has been around for 2 years after the grouping of the railways into the big four companies: Great Western, London North Eastern, LMS and Southern. But they had an issue: image, PR. They were not the most popular kids on the block by any means. With new timetables and higher fares causing a constant source of aggravation to the travelling public, they needed to get them back on side, and fast. Now, image wasn't a problem unique to Southern, London North Eastern. They actually outsourced their PR to an external company and then brought it in-house after a few years. But Southern Railway went one step further. Sir Herbert Walker, the then chairman of Southern Railway, employed John Elliott, the then assistant editor of the London Evening Standard, to be his assistant in marketing and publicity. Now, this was an interesting but genius decision. Interesting because at that point, the railways didn't really like recruiting talent from outside. They preferred their own people. And genius because his appointment was an acknowledgement from Walker that the railway just didn't have the skills to deal with publicity and, crucially, the press, who could quite happily be seen as the enemy at this point. Elliott, however, did have prior experience, and he soon put that to work, pretty much as soon as he started. Within days of Elliott's appointment, various articles and adverts started appearing in newspapers, which are both informative and easy to understand. These were carefully crafted to try and boost the railway's standing with the public and also encourage holiday makers to use the railways to go on holiday. One famous piece, showing a child talking to a driver about where they're going on their holidays, really captured the public's imagination. So much so we even pay homage to it here with our own little tribute at the Watercress Line. So how did this all translate into locomotives? Impressed by LNER's new Pacifics and GWR's Castle class, Elliott tasked Walker with coming up with a name for the new N15 locomotives being built, something that would really capture the public's imaginations. Elliott realised that Southern Railway actually goes near Tintagel Castle, so he decided to suggest that they were named after the legend of King Arthur and Camelot. Now, before he could get the final go-ahead, he would need to get permission from Richard Mansell, the chief engineer who designed the locomotives. When informed of the decision to rename his class of locomotive, Mansell reportedly replied, "Tell Sir Herbert I have no objection, but I warn you, it won't make any difference to the working of the engines." Of course, that didn't matter. It was all a marketing exercise, and just like that, the King Arthur class was born. This began Southern Railway's policy of naming their express passenger locomotives. Elliott himself would eventually become general manager of Southern Railway, and once the railways were nationalised, chief regional officer of the Southern region. Interestingly, when the King Arthurs were retired, their namesakes were actually transferred over to the new 73 standards that BR built, better known as the Standard 5s. Now this gave them the nickname of the Standard Arthurs. Now, different locomotive classes would have their own naming strategies. These ones were designed to succeed the King Arthurs. They're more powerful four-cylinder locomotives designed to haul the continental boat trains from London down to Dover. They were dubbed the Lord Nelson class, named after admirals in the Royal Naval Fleet. The first one being named Lord Nelson, and it would go on to be the sole survivor of the fleet. Aside from your regular travelling public, you could normally find a lot of school children train spotting as well. This gave Southern Railway an idea, as they were currently working on their new locomotive, the V-Class. They decided to name them after schools on the network, which was a brilliant idea because then school children could look out for their engine. Southern Railway even went one step further. Where possible, they take the locomotive down to the local station of the school it was named after to be officially named. People from the local area were invited along, and it also gave school kids a chance to see their locomotive in person and get on the footplate of their engine. A publicity masterstroke. Fast forward to the 1940s and war is raging. Oliver Bulleid has succeeded Richard Mansell as Chief Mechanical Engineer for Severn Railway and would go on to be known for many things, including his distinctive style of locomotives and coaches. Following the success of the schools and Lord Nelson class, Severn Railway had generally fallen behind when it came to investment in their fleet. However, that was all about to change when Gilbert Slumper succeeded Herbert Walker as the head of Severn Railway and instructed Bulleid to prepare designs for 20 new express passenger locomotives to replace the Lord Nelsons. This revolutionary design of locomotive would be both distinctive in looks and performance. When it came to naming the class, Severn Railway initially toyed with the idea of naming them after victories in World War II, going as far to mock up a plate of River Plate after the 1939 battle in the South Atlantic. However, victories at that point in the war were few and far between, so another strategy needed to be done. The then chairman of Union Castle Line came up with an idea. Name the locomotives after shipping companies that had called at Southampton docks during peacetime. This idea resonated in 1941 because during the war, the shipping companies were bombarded when they travelled across the Atlantic. Just like that, the Merchant Navy class was born, and the first of a Class 21C1 Channel packet was named on the 10th of March 1941. After the naming ceremony at Eastleigh Works, where it was built, it ran a special train down to here at Alresford Station for invited guests. The Merchant Navies were brilliant, but they did suffer one major ailment: their weight. They were limited in the routes they could use. So to get around this problem, Bulleid designed a lighter version, the Light Pacifics. 110 were built between 1945 and 1951, were designated West Countries, a publicity masterstroke because the locomotives would inevitably visit their namesake. They'd also feature the name of the place they're named after, including the town's crest. Again, another publicity masterstroke. It soon became clear that the Light Pacifics were going to be used further afield than the west of England. All of a sudden, the novelty factor of having West Country class locomotives didn't quite have the same ring to it if they were going to work in the east. A new strategy had to be made up, and this is where they came up with this, the Battle of Britain class. Now, it's important to remember that these last 62 locomotives are exactly the same as the West Country. It is all literally marketing nameplates. The new batch of locomotives would be named after RAF squadrons, airfields, commanders and aircraft that had participated in the Battle of Britain over Kent, Surrey and Sussex in recognition of their war effort. Instead of a coat of arms, the Battle of Britons would feature an image or crest, which was relevant to the name, so Manston being an airfield, the RAF crest suited her quite nicely. When BR were formed, they'd go on to make more of these Light Pacifics, but would revert back to the West Country naming policy. Now remember, all of this so far we've talked about the Southern network, but of course this story was true all across the regions for their own naming strategies. If you think of GWI, you have castles, kings, halls. LMS had their patriots, princess and coronations. LNER, their most famous locomotive Mallard, was named after a breed of duck. Sir Nigel Gresley, the designer, was a keen bird watcher and had an interest in breeding wild birds and ducks, so named 6 of his A4 classes after them. Of course, the idea of naming classes of train or locomotive is still very much in use to this day. If you think of the new Hitachi units which now run on the GWR metals, well, in Great Western terms, they're called IETs, Intercity Express Trains. Their counterparts on LNER, they call them Azumas. Translates from the Japanese word for east because they run up the East Coast Main Line. At the end of the day, it's all marketing. But it is interesting to see just one story of how it started. That's it from us this week, folks. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. A huge thank you to our friends here at Didcot Railway Centre and at the Bluebell Railway as well. And we'll see you next time.